I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today, we're talking about the state of local news, and the Director of Development at the Daily Memphian, Sarah Leach, is here to discuss. So stay with us for a conversation with Sarah. Sarah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me today.
It was easy. You were already in the office.
Yeah,
actually,
just down the hall.
Just to be fair, just down the hall. But we want to talk, actually, one, because you're new to the Daily Memphian, a couple months?
Yeah, September I started.
September. So we'll talk a bit about that and your background and so on. But partly, we're in the middle of our year-end campaign at Daily Memphian. So rather than, like we were joking before, we're going to have a phone number and a pledge, and we're not going to do that. We do hope people support us. But just to kind of talk a bit about 6.5 years, give or take, from our launch, why we exist the way we do, why we're a nonprofit, why our whole sort of business model, and kind of talk through some of that stuff that I have lived with for 7.5 years, but it's still kind of new to you.
Yes.
And so maybe the first question would be, why did you want to come over to the Daily Memphian?
Yeah. I grew up in a house that always had the newspaper. So my dad has, read the newspaper faithfully every morning. We listened to NPR on the way to school, much to my chagrin as a kid. So understanding what was going on in the community and kind of being educated about that was always important in my house. And then, fast forward to being an adult, I've made my career mostly in working in nonprofit management, with a focus on fundraising and leadership and board development. And so I was looking for a new job, wanted to get more involved in the local community because I've been working remotely for quite a few years.
Even before COVID.
Even before COVID. I was a fundraising consultant and worked with churches all around the country. I've been traveling since before my kids were born, which will be about 7 years. So when I saw that the Daily Memphian was looking for a development director, it felt like a really awesome opportunity to not only get more immersed in Memphis, but to really get immersed in Memphis, because the Daily Memphian is telling the stories of what's happening today, every day, right? We're a daily paper. So every day our reporters are out there, and to be able to support their work and to support our community and getting access to that news, to me, felt like a really just neat sort of calling. So really excited.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a bunch of new people, which is a good thing, and we've had new people come in. It's always good when people come in with new perspectives, because I am so close to it. I mean, others of us who've been here from the beginning are just so close to it. And on this nonprofit part of it and the funding of the Daily Memphian, you work a lot with Andy Cates, board chair, and me. Andy's one of the co-founders. And it's interesting that you are our first ever director of fundraising and development. And yet we've raised a ton of money. I think it's approaching $20 million that we've raised, almost all of it in Memphis since we started. But the reason for that, and Andy and I talked about it a year ago, I think at the 5-year mark when we hit our 5-year anniversary last September. So that was September 2023. And he and I had really hoped and had an initial goal that by the end of 5 years, we would really not have to raise any money. We would be subscriptions and advertising and other revenue, maybe a small amount, 5% that we would raise. The truth is, last year we raised, I think in 2023, we raised about 25% of our budget was philanthropy. I think this year it'll be about 20%. And I think we can edge it down. But I can't remember exactly what Andy and I said in that podcast, but, we were hard on ourselves that we didn't hit the goal we had, but then we also realized there was a reason, and a good reason, we didn't hit the goal we had, which is this is an incredibly difficult business. There was always a reason we were a nonprofit. We do all this free stuff in schools. We're free in every school that wants it. We're free with a lot of nonprofits. We make all our election coverage free. People hear this and see it, but I think you've helped me remember there's all these things we do that we don't tell people about. We make, again, all the elections, primaries, and so on. Any kind of breaking big news that's just of some sort of importance to the community. A lot of our COVID coverage was free for 6 months, the first 6 months of COVID. All those things mean that we don't operate like a business, because if we were a pure business, we wouldn't do those things.
Yeah.
And if we were a pure business, we would charge a lot more than $168 a year. And so we sort of have this balancing act where we've got to continually raise money. We also know, and you've been exposed to it some now, that we have all these analytics that tell us, and I'm not going to name names or name stories, but there are a lot of stories we do that don't necessarily drive a lot of subscriptions, but that are really important stories to do.
Yep.
And that is really, in a sense, underwritten. All those things, free access and stuff, is underwritten by the fundraising that now you are leading and that, I'm a part of, Andy's a part of, other people are part of.
Yeah. And I think when I'm out in the community talking to people, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of people that I know from different walks of life stop me and say, "Oh my gosh, you're working at the Daily Memphian now. How exciting."
I cannot tell you how happy that makes me.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is just totally genuine. When you've told me those stories, I'm just like, I love that so much. So,
being on the food podcast that we do, I had people stop me and that I didn't normally get to talk to and say, "Hey, I heard you on the Daily Memphian podcast." So all of that is really fun and has opened up doors where I get to have conversations about the importance of news with people, in a casual setting, right? I'm not on an official fundraising visit call, but I get to say, now you remember, people my age and older remember newspapers being kind of a daily thing in their household, whether they were a child or an adult. Most adults these days, I would say millennials and older, remember newspapers being really prevalent in their households. And what I first learned when I got on board with the Daily Memphian, I had to wrap my head around, why doesn't that model work anymore? What has changed in the last decade or two that led you guys to start the Daily Memphian, A, as a nonprofit, and B, as a digital-only paper? Why is that? What are the market forces that have happened? And I think that is something that most people don't understand. They just simply saw the commercial appeal getting skinnier and skinnier as it came into their, into their driveway or at their doorstep. They saw the local coverage that's happening, become less and less local, more national news mixed in with our local news. And so newspapers from a consumer perspective, I think, have just become not as relevant for them. And the reason is, and you can speak to this better than I can, I think that sort of consolidation of the newspaper ownership in order to try and make news profitable as advertisers were moving to more digital advertising.
Yeah.
The model of putting an ad in a newspaper or putting an ad on a billboard or putting an ad in a radio slot and just broadcasting it out there to people and hoping that their eyeballs or their ears hear it, their eyeballs see it or their ears hear it. Advertisers don't have to hope anymore. They know through their digital advertising with Google, they know through their digital advertising on Facebook and in all of your social media, they have much more control. And so they stopped needing newspapers as much. And that commercial model that newspapers had built themselves on began to shift at a rate that newspapers, my understanding is that they didn't respond to fast enough.
Yeah.
And so we got ourselves in this place where the paper newspaper wasn't working. And so staff sizes got cut down, which means that quality news got cut down, which means that the paper that's coming to your doorstep is skinnier and less relevant news to you. What you're finding online with many places is less relevant to you. And so that all leads to when Andy and Eric, you guys came together and said, we need news that is truly local. And there are new models out there that people are experimenting with because the profits aren't the same as they used to be in the news business. Let's try incorporating as a nonprofit instead of as a for-profit. Let's acknowledge that news is a community good that the community should be able to fund.
Right.
Through philanthropic giving and charitable giving. Let's embrace that. Let's become a nonprofit. Let's cut out the cost of the paper, the printing, the distribution.
Yeah.
And let's take advantage of the digital advertising options that are presented to us.
And also the big one too was subscriptions. And that's a really uncommon thing. There are a lot of local news nonprofits that have launched in the last decade, many that have launched since we've launched, and very few of them have paywalls and very few of them charge meaningful amounts for their subscriptions. And truly very few of the remaining, and there are many remaining local newspapers, whether they're owned independently or they're part of a chain, very few of them charge meaningful rates for their subscriptions. And so the only thing I'll add to what you said, which is totally what happened, and newspapers got caught off guard. And it's worth noting that newspaper companies, television, broadcast companies, local and national, and billboard companies were some of the most profitable, like fortunes were made in those businesses for a century. It's kind of, I mean, whenever TV launched, but fortunes, the night found, like huge amounts of money were made. And now these businesses are very just, they're just shells of what they used to be. And because of the shifts and everything, everything
right?
you talk
I mean,
about,
it's the internet, it's social media, it's
and
power.
and the companies that in many ways took their place, like Twitter, Twitter's a little bit of an exception, but like Facebook, like Google, all are incredibly profitable. Fortunes have been made and will be made on those companies. But the subscription part of that is the part that continues to make us different, because just this is not bragging, it kind of really surprises me. While at a national level, I think people are more and more used to, I got to pay for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, whatever you subscribe to, National Review, you're going to have to pay for that and probably have to pay a reasonable rate, a meaningful rate. Locally, virtually all of the local publishers are hooked on $1 for a month, $1 for 6 months, $1 for 12 months. They simply want to run up the number of subscribers,
by providing a discount.
By providing this massive discount. And that's something we've never done, which is in the weeds, but worth noting. So that was one thing. And then again, even though because of the things I talked about at the top, we didn't hit the goal we initially had of being completely, self-sufficient on subscriptions, advertising, and other, and no or very little philanthropy. We're still the big. I don't know of anyone else in local nonprofit news who has 80% of their revenue coming from earned revenue. It just doesn't happen. Most of them are 80 to 90% philanthropy, which is incredibly generous of people to do, but most of them are a fraction of the size of the Daily Memphian. They have 5 journalists, they have 10, they don't have 40. Very few of them do. Even the Texas Tribune, which is amazing and is 12, 13 years old, and is one of the granddaddies, as it were, of nonprofit news, I think has a newsroom of around 30. And they've got a $8, $9, $10 million budget every year. And they raise virtually 80, 90% of that is completely philanthropy, which is crazy to me. I would lose my mind. I would never be able to do it because it would be so hard. But they're also a statewide newspaper. They're based in a capital. They've got oil and tech money, and that's fine. That's good for them. Same with anyway, we are an anomaly in that subscription part. That's the one thing I would add to what you said.
And remind me how many full-time employees we have right now, Eric?
It's around 53.
Wow.
53. So it's
we're a big team.
37 plus in the newsroom, another 12, 13, 14 in business, tech, advertising, philanthropy, customer service, and so on. Let me do this real quick and come back to a bunch of stuff we were just talking about, but remind everyone that this is The Sidebar. It airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30, focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's not just a radio show, though. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Memphis Grizzlies podcast with Chris Harrington and Drew Hill, our food podcast, Soundbites, hosted by Jennifer Chandler, in which Sarah was on recently, and that also airs on WYXR every Thursday at 11. We also host the podcast version of Behind the Headlines, which we produce with the folks at WKNO TV every week. All of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site, as well as iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can get both Sidebar and Soundbites on WYXR.org, or you can download the WYXR app. And that includes all the WYXR shows, talk, music, archives, a great way to keep up with what's going on with WYXR. If you're not a supporter of WYXR, it is nonprofit, listener-supported radio, so you can become a member and get a bunch of benefits. You can do a one-off donation, go to the website or the app to do that. And if you're not a paid subscriber to the Daily Memphian, do consider becoming one. Paid subscriptions are over 50% of what supports the biggest newsroom in Memphis. If you are a paid subscriber, or if you're not, you can also give a donation. We're in the middle of our end-of-year campaign, and we appreciate all that support for the reasons I talked about. Free access in schools, free election coverage, free coverage of community interest, free coverage in a lot of, and probably a growing number of nonprofit organizations in the community. Just a little more housekeeping before I get back to talking with Sarah. We have coming up soon on the show Anthony Young from Epicenter. That's before year end. And then right after, I think it's the first week of January, Todd Richardson from Crosstown will be on to talk about all kinds of things going on in Crosstown, including we'll talk a bit about the new venue that Crosstown is building in partnership with Live Nation. We also recently had George Abbott talking about the Civic Commons Initiative. George was at Memphis River Parks Partnership, is now at the Hyde Foundation. And we had Jeff Hewlett, musician, friend of the show, great conversation about music, about MTV, of all things, about the Live Nation venue that's coming, all kinds of things with Jeff Hewlett. I mentioned Behind the Headlines. Coming up this week, we've got Mayor Paul Young. Nothing to talk about with Paul. I don't know what we're going to do, but we'll figure out how to fill 26 minutes talking to Mayor Paul Young. And Steve Mulroy will be on the week after that. Again, nothing to talk about with Steve Mulroy, district attorney, but we'll figure that out. Recently on Behind the Headlines, and you can go to Daily Memphian or you can go to WKNO or YouTube to get this. We had Bakara Malden, the interim president of MATA, on the show. We did a roundtable talking about, among other things, the DOJ report, which we'll be talking to Paul Young about, and probably Steve Mulroy a bit. We also recently had our commercial real estate business seminar. It's kind of a year in review look at the state of commercial real estate and business, all things Memphis. And we were very pleased to have Rick Shadyac, the CEO of ALSAC, on the show. He did not break news at the event by announcing his stepping down as CEO and into an advisory role, but he was really great. And you can get that, even though you missed it. It was December 5th, but you can get the video on the Daily Memphian site or on YouTube. Just search for Daily Memphian and commercial real estate, and you'll get that video. But we are here with Sarah for another 10 minutes talking about news and Daily Memphian. What I was going to add, about the news part and the fundraising part, we are still, it's this mix of funding, right? That we're a $5.5 million budget. And so I do think people sometimes think, well, you've got big grants from the Community Foundation or from the Hyde Family Foundation or from Assisi or First Horizon Foundation, some of the big foundations in town. But all the donations really do help. So I do want to say that to anybody who's listening. We have people who give $5, $10, $20 a month, $5 a month. We have people who give, hundreds and thousands, but we really do appreciate all of it. Part of that is because, and part of, we hit people really hard with these asks. I went to this Thanksgiving. I was joking with you. I went to a Thanksgiving friends and family kind of gathering, and like two different people were like, oh, I got an email from you this morning. And I was kind of like, oh, I'm sorry. But we hit people hard with it because of everything you articulated really well. This is really important. And we do need to raise that 15 to 20% of our budget every year. And also, people don't know we're a nonprofit still because we so downplayed that for so much of our existence. And a part of these campaigns, in my mind, is like letting people know we're a 501c3 nonprofit for a reason. It's a very difficult business. And we are reliant because of all these kind of mission-driven decisions we make on on people's donations. Yeah,
and so the way that I've been packaging it as I've been talking to people, because I'm not as close to the story as you are, having lived it every day for 7 years.
And you're right? A better person for that.
People think of nonprofits, and they think of nonprofits as relying on contributed funds, right? Either from foundations or individuals. And people also, when they think of nonprofit news, they think of what I lovingly call the NPR model, right? Where you're a membership organization, everybody gets access to everything for free, and then generous members and foundations contribute money to underwrite the cost of everything. We're different from that. And telling that story has been really kind of challenging and fun for me. We are a nonprofit, but we are subscription and advertising driven. Like you said, our subscriptions earn us about 50% of our revenue. When we count subscriptions, paid advertising, and other revenue that we earn from the seminars and things like that, we earn about 75 to 80% of our own revenue. Most people have never heard of a nonprofit that earns their own revenue, right? So we're at 75 to 80%. I think that we can be really proud of that. So the 20 to 25% that we're fundraising each year, we are asking people to contribute over and beyond their subscription. The subscription is just like your Netflix or, your Prime or maybe your Audible subscription, right? You're paying a monthly fee to get full access, unlimited access to our news. If you want to read it just like you read the newspaper back in the day, you pay the subscription to get the unlimited access. The donations that we're asking for are either above and beyond that for folks that can afford that. We're saying, can you pay a little bit more to underwrite our free community service? Or maybe you're a user who is what we lovingly call a registered user here, where you come to our site, you read a couple of articles a month. You've never paid for a subscription, but sometimes you hit our paywall, right? You read your handful of free articles a month. You ignore us for a little bit of time, and then you come back the next month and you read your free articles. Or maybe you're voting every week on the player of the week for high school sports. Those users that are interacting with us but don't want to pay the monthly subscription, don't want the full unlimited access. A way to contribute for the content that you're consuming. That content isn't free for us to create. So what if you gave $5 a month, instead of paying for the full subscription fee, or you gave a one-time $50 gift? Those are the ways to acknowledge, hey, Daily Memphian, I like what you're doing. I'm glad that you're here. I'm not going to subscribe. Right. I don't want the full access, but you can make a charitable contribution to our mission.
It is. It's good to remind people of that, because there are people who get our morning edition and kind of read all the headlines. We were talking in a meeting earlier talking about that, who read our morning edition. They get a lot of news from that. It's kind of a summary of the day's news. They don't pay. That's fine. I mean, if we were a for-profit, we'd probably cut them off because we would be wanting to, charge for all this valuable community. Yeah, it's content we do, but we try to find that balancing act. Well, just a couple minutes left. I want to circle back to something you were saying, and I'll turn into a question, which is when the commercial appeal, and this is not about picking on the commercial appeal, and it is absolutely not about picking on the journalists and the people in Memphis who have worked there and work there now and do really great work with a difficult situation. I mean, the newsroom has been reduced by something like 90% from its peak just 20 years ago. But that happened everywhere. Yeah. And one thing that I think maybe people didn't realize, and I think back on when we were looking at launching, and then we did launch, and before we launched, people would come up to me because I was in local news, and what's going to happen? How is this happening? They didn't realize it was happening everywhere because they just thought it was maybe a Memphis thing. Oh, our newspaper is getting gutted. It was everywhere, and it was not the decisions of the people in Memphis. It was just all these kind of factors we talked about at the top: choices made, things beyond newspapers' control. And that idea that 90% of, there's some 30 to 40,000 local journalists have lost their jobs in the last 20 years. Those jobs have not come back, and they're never coming back, right? Local TV news has lost a lot of people and is poised to lose even more because, and this is a national phenomenon, because of cord cutting, because of the whole changes in the business dynamic, because of YouTube, because of all these things in the way people get their local news now. So local news, which used to be this incredibly profitable business with tremendous reach, is still a profitable business with a lot of reach, but is seeing cuts over the next few years potentially that are really deep in terms of their ability to cover the local markets. But go ahead.
I was going to say what that brings me to think about is I am very interested in this position in working with the Daily Memphian in cultivating the next generations of news readers, because in that vacuum of trustworthy news, we've all seen it. You've got the hot takes, you've got the talking heads, you've got the fake news, you've got the social media influencers, right? Folks are filling in the void with information, but it's not trustworthy information. It's not local information. It's not necessarily always ethical information or accurate information. And so for us to have a source here in town of high quality, totally local, trustworthy. I'll bring in all the adjectives to talk about our great team, but I feel really convicted that we are we play an important role in this community in creating that news that can be trusted and that is accurate and holds power to account when it's appropriate. But we have to combat the forces that are out there working to grab kids' attention, young adults' attention. Heck, even, me before I joined the Daily Memphian, I'll be guilty. I'll admit that I'm guilty of not paying for a subscription because I would just read the headlines either in an email or on social. And so how do I articulate to the other people like me out there that are adults who want to be informed, but just don't take the time to understand or to care? I want to tell the story of why we matter. Particularly in this era of so much information to weed through.
Yeah. With just a minute or so left, people can donate. That's not the whole purpose of this, but you can go to dailymemphian.com/donate and you will get a donation page and you can do a one-off donation, a recurring donation. We do appreciate it very much.
And through the end of the year, I'll interrupt you. Through the end of the year, we have a matching gift for all new donors who have never given a charitable gift to the Daily Memphian before. Your gift will be matched. That's up to $50,000. So we are. So
if you want to give $50,000, we can get that whole match done today.
Done. But if you want to give
so much,
$5, your $5 will be turned into $10.
Yes. Yes. Good point. Last question, because I always ask people, what was the first concert you went to?
Oh, I should have prepared for this because I knew this was your last question. The first one that I really remember of note is my parents took us to James Taylor, my sister and I. We went to a lot of good, like we saw Eric Clapton, we saw James Taylor, Paul Simon. So we saw some good
What's the first one you went to? Those are good. What first one you went to with your own money? You know what I mean? Like whether it was your allowance or it was your job, summer job? No?
I don't know. And I grew up in Nashville where there's a lot of good music and I went to a lot. I really don't have a memory of a first.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go look. I have a box of ticket stubs.
I'm
have to go back and look.
Nice. I used to have those somewhere. I don't know where they are now, though. Sarah Leach, thank you very much from the Daily Memphian. Thanks for being here. That is all the time we have this week, though. Do join us next week. We've got Anthony Young from Epicenter coming on. A couple weeks after the holidays, we've got Todd Richardson from Crosstown coming on. If you missed any of the show today, you can go to WYXR, the Daily Memphian, or wherever you get your podcasts and get the full episode. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.